Hi, we're down here today. In the month of July, I read 8 books and I knit half a sock. So today I'm going to talk about books. The first book I read in July was The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. It's a classic. This is a really beautiful cloth-bound penguin edition of this book. I got it for my birthday. I have never read it and I always wanted to read it, so I did it. It's very good, but I didn't enjoy reading it that much. It's a common story with me in classics. Anyway, so The Picture of Dorian Gray is an allegory about youth and beauty and ethics and being a good person, kind of. A young man in the late 1800s in England, I think, all of that. His name's Dorian Gray. He has 2 friends that he recently met who are older men. One is a painter who paints his portrait. The other one is just like a high society, kind of rich family money, kind of dandy sort of guy. And the painter is like pretty good and ethical and nice. And the other guy is not that ethical, and he's got this whole philosophy revolving around youth and beauty and serving yourself and enjoying life without caring about consequences, stuff like that. Dorian Gray falls in with these 2, specifically the latter guy. And what's his name anyway? I'm just going to call him that guy throughout the whole book. Is it Harry? Yep, Harry. So Dorian Gray and Harry become friends. The whole first half of the book I found to be excruciatingly boring, even though it's all written with Oscar Wilde's like really signature wit and humor, and which is I typically find really entertaining in Oscar Wilde writing. It was so boring because the whole first half of the book is like all conversational monologue about philosophy. And it's so boring. It's so pompous, and it's these 3 like high society English guys who like come from family money, and they're just like gallivanting around like talking about how people should be and the world should be and blah blah blah. It's just like super boring and super like cringy and hard to read. I get it though. It lays out the whole like basis of the idea of this book. This book is critical about that philosophy that's being laid out in the first half, but it's still just very boring to read. Anyway, second half of the book, after you get past all the monologues, after all the speeches, things start actually happening. You get introduced to the magical nature of the portrait, where the portrait that was painted of Dorian Gray takes on all of the aesthetic consequences of Dorian Gray's actions. The moral weight of the consequences of the things that he does, of his sins, it all shows on his portrait rather than on his own face. And the whole rest of the book is just how Dorian Gray deals with that, how he lives his life, knowing that nothing he does is going to affect his beauty or his youth. It's only going to affect the portrait. This book went a lot of directions I didn't expect. My big experience reading Oscar Wilde is The Importance of Being Earnest, which is way different than this book. I thought this book was going to be a lot more lighthearted. It's not. It's a little on the darker side. And I just found it to be kind of boring, kind of hard to get through. I kind of felt like I was in an English class and I had to read this because it's good and it's important. And the message is really well done. And it's still relevant, even though I feel like, I mean, obviously the things in it, the specifics are outdated, and it felt really dated to me reading it, but it's still relevant and it's still very good. I just felt like I had to kind of trudge through it, honestly. It wasn't that entertaining to me, but it was good. Yeah, definitely had a very gothic feel to it, and I don't know, if you're into the whole gothic late 1800s high society English but dark kind of vibe, it's great. I just am not really, but I don't know. I think I gave it 4 stars because it is actually really, really, really good. It's just not really my thing. Next book I read was Ariande by Jennifer Saint, and I loved this book. This was another Greek mythology retelling. I've been reading a couple of those in these past months, and it was wonderful. Ariande was a princess of Crete whose brother was the Minotaur, who was kind of an abomination that was born as half man, half bull, who was kept as a monster to intimidate everybody, all of his kingdom, by Ariadne's father. It was a bad situation that she lived in, and she got out of it, ended up going and living on an island and marrying Dionysus, who was like the god of wine and stuff. And it was just her story. It's one of these books that takes a little known, little talked about character of Greek mythology who has ties to much bigger, more well-known characters and tells her full story from a feminist perspective. And I just loved it. It was wonderful. It follows the story of Ariadne and her sister and who they married and what happened to their lives. And all of the big figures in Greek mythology that we already know are all like kind of minor characters, and them two are the main characters. And I just loved it. It was kind of stock feminist Greek retelling, but I adored it. It was so good. I flew through it. I listened to this one on audio and I loved it. And then I went on to read Galatea by Madeline Miller. This is a short story about Galatea, who was a statue built or carved or whatever out of marble or stone or something by a great sculptor of ancient times. And a god like wanted to bless this guy, so he said that his most beautiful sculpture could be brought to life, so he brought Galatea to life to be his wife. And of course, she was a stone statue brought to life. She wasn't happy, so he sent her to a mental institution. It's about her stay in the mental institution. And it's short. It's a short story. It's short and sweet and funny and poignant, and I loved it. It was wonderful. It was Madeline Miller, but condensed. It was beautiful. Next, I finished a book that I've been working on since I think January, and that is 1,000 Beginnings and Endings. And this is a short story collection compiled by Ellen O. And it's retellings of myths and legends from South and East Asian cultures. And it's all by different authors, and I read through this very, very slowly. Some stories grabbed me way more than other stories, and so some stories I like flew through and was super into, and then I would hit a story that I wasn't that into, and it would kind of like knock me off this book for a little while. So I was kind of on and off with this book, reading stories pretty slowly here and there. But I finally finished it. One of my two favorite stories in this collection was called Olivia's Table by Alyssa Wong. And it's based on the Chinese festival called Yulan, or the Hungry Ghost Festival. And this retelling of it takes place in the Southwest Desert, where there's like a ghost town, and every year this ghost festival happens where ghosts are presented with a feast, and they can come out and feast on this real food that our main character Olivia prepares for them. People come to see it. It's a big tourist attraction. It has to do with ghosts and food and the Southwest, and I love all those things. And I just really, really liked that one. The other one that I really loved is called The Land of the Morning Calm by E.C. Myers. And this was based on, she calls it a kind of mashup of the greatest hits of Korean mythology and folk literature. The story itself is about a young girl who loses her mother. Her mother was very into gaming, specifically this one, I forget, I don't know what they're called. They're like the big online multiplayer games, like World of Warcraft kind of thing. But it's this game is based on Korean gods and folklore and mythology. So that's what the game is based on, and it's called The Land of the Morning Calm. Essentially, the mom dies, and she meets her mother in the game as a ghost who needs to be able to cross over to like the river of death or whatever. And I just loved that one. Another one where it's about like death and the afterlife and gods and video games. And I loved it. It was so good. There are other really great stories in this collection too. So if you're interested in mythological retellings, this is another really, really good one. The next book that I read and listened to on audio was Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And Audiobook was definitely the way to go for this one. The audiobook reading was so good. So somebody recommended it to me in my last video that if I read Daisy Jones, definitely listen to the audiobook. And I'm going to tell you the same thing if you decide to read this book. Do the audio. This was the single best audiobook recording I've ever listened to. And I think what it is, and you can really tell, is that it was a full cast, which is always great. But I don't think it was a full cast of like audiobook readers. It was a full cast of like voiceover actors. And so they weren't reading the book. They were like using it as a script and acting the book. It was so good. The book itself is fiction, and it's written as a collection of interviews with a lot of different people, and it's about a band, a rock and roll band from the 60s called Daisy Jones and the Six. And it reads as a biography of the band as told through interviews. And it felt like just reading a biography of a musical group. It felt like watching like a VH1 documentary of a musical group. Honestly, I didn't love it. It just kind of, this is my blanket excuse. It kind of wasn't my thing. It was really entertaining, and it was just like, like I said, it was just kind of like watching a VH1 documentary on a really popular band, or like watching a biopic or something like that. And, it's Daisy Jones was like the main character. She's like a young rich girl from Hollywood who's like super beautiful and super young, and like everybody loves her and wants to be her and wants to be around her. She's got, a lot of issues with her parents. She ends up having a lot of drug issues. She meets a band of guys in LA. It's all about the LA music scene and people's relationships with each other. It's about love and having kids in this kind of environment, and it's about drug use and alcoholism and trying to break out of that, and it's about making music. And I think the parts about making music were actually pretty well written. It's a really nicely written book in that it really like plays a picture. It really like gives you a feeling like this is a story that you really want to keep following, like it really happened, and like you really want to hear the music that these fictional people fictionally made, but you can't because it's not real. But it was entertaining, and it was page turning, and I wanted to continue reading it until it was done, but I was kind of left not really caring after it was done. I don't know. Like I said, I felt like I just like watched a documentary or read a biography, and I kind of just didn't care. So I don't know, if you're into that kind of thing, then it was good. And the audiobook was, like I said, it was the best audiobook recording I've ever heard. I'm glad I read it just so that I could have listened to that. But I don't know. It was okay for me. I think I gave it 3.5 stars or something like that. It did really put me back onto a little Fleetwood Mac thing afterwards, because I think it's kind of partially based on Fleetwood Mac and their albums and their interpersonal relationships and stuff. But yeah, definitely Stevie Nicks vibes and stuff. The next book that I read was 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He was a Colombian author. He wrote this book in the 60s. And this is a beast of an epic. And I heard somewhere that one of the things that makes it so great is that it allowed, at the time of writing, the people of Latin America to kind of understand themselves and their history and their political histories. And I can see that. It's a very good book. It's a total masterpiece. It was a little hard to read, though. And I think that people are pretty torn on that. I've heard that people just like love reading this book because of how beautiful it is and how beautifully written it is. And other people just can't get through it because of the writing style, and they don't understand why everybody loves it so much. I think I fall somewhere in between. I agree that this is a total masterpiece and that it's beautifully written, and there are parts that are so funny and parts that are so pretty and parts that are so like tragic and ugly. And it's written in this really wonderful way that when I think back on it is wonderful. but as I was reading it, it wasn't working for me. It's very like stream of consciousness info dumpy. Somebody on the back cover of this book likened it to the Book of Genesis, and I can see that because it talks about a family, the Buendia family, over like 5 or 6 generations, and the whole 400 pages of this book is just like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this person had this person, and then this person met this person, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then 100 years ago this happened, and then like a few years into the future this happened, and then it's just all very like stream of consciousness. It feels like a total info dump, the entire 400 pages, and it can be a little hard to follow because it follows so many generations, and they always name everybody after their parents or their grandparents. So many characters in this book have the same name. It can be a little confusing because of the writing style, because of the whole name thing. And for me, it was hard to read. It was not an enjoyable read. The first 100 pages were an enjoyable read. I loved the first 100 pages. So pretty much like the synopsis of this book is there's a fictional town in Latin America called Macondo. And you're following the establishment of this town, and then like the next 100 years in this town, focusing on the Buendia family. The patriarch of the Buendia family is Jose Arcadio Buendia, and in the first 100 pages the town is new, and Jose Arcadio Buendia is very like whimsical and fantastical, and a band of gypsies comes through the town every year, and the head of this group of traveling people his name is Melquiades, and he always brings inventions and stuff from around the world to Macondo. And Melquiades, whatever it is, Melquiades and Jose Arcadio Buendia formed this really cool relationship that I really loved following. And that's kind of it. Everything else was just really kind of a struggle to get through. It was another book where it just kind of felt like every time I sat down to read it, kind of like the picture of Dorian Gray, it felt like I was like doing homework. So this is it's kind of a masterpiece. It's huge and it's sprawling and it's weird. There are ghosts in it. There are things that can't be real in it. It's one of the first magical realism books. There's so much about this book that I think was very innovative for its time. And it's a masterful piece of literature, but it is also a classic. And I just find that classics are a little difficult for me because there's so little for me to relate to. And that was true for this book too. But that's not to say it wasn't wonderful. It was super good. There are a lot of weird things in this book too, though, like incest. The way this book treats women isn't great. You're either a whore or you're a chaste, virginal, wifely sort of figure who does nothing but sit around and do needlepoint all day. Not that there's anything wrong with needlepoint, but still. I half read this and half listened to the audiobook. I have heard people say that the audiobook is not the way to go, that you actually have to physically read it. I was having a hard time physically reading it, so I needed some help. So I turned on the audiobook for this and kind of went back and forth. I will say the audiobook sucks. The last book I read, the audiobook was the best thing I've ever listened to. The audiobook of this was terrible. And a lot of people like it. I don't know if it's just me, but the reader, his name's like John Lee or something like that. I can't remember. But he's like a British guy, and he has like this like kind of Patrick Stewart-like British accent. And to me, it didn't fit the book. This book is Latin American, and there was this like highfalutin British guy like doing the audiobook and doing it very dramatically, kind of like picture like Patrick Stewart doing like overly dramatic Shakespeare is how he was reading this book. And I wish a Latin American person read it instead, because it didn't feel right to me. But yeah, 100 Years of Solitude. It was a commitment. It was kind of a beast. It was kind of hard. I'm really glad I read it. It's wonderful and fantastical, but there it is. I think I gave it 4 stars. Then we have a total palate cleanser after all these books that I either found to be really difficult or kind of just didn't care about that much. Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. This book was so fun and it was so good, and I definitely think you should read it. I loved it so much. Of course, my first introduction to Howl's Moving Castle is the Miyazaki movie. It's an animated film, and I've seen it quite a few times. I love Miyazaki. Howl's Moving Castle is actually one of my least favorite Miyazaki films. Don't exactly know why, but I decided I wanted to try to read this book for a little book club I was having with two of my friends. This next weekend, actually, in like 4 days, I'm going on an out-of-town weekend trip with these two friends. I'm driving up to Oregon with one friend who I live in the same town with, and then another one of our friends who lives in Washington is gonna fly down and meet us in Oregon, and we got an Airbnb and we're all just gonna like hang out together for like 3 days, and it's gonna be great. And I suggested we do a little book club, and this was one of the books I suggested, and this is what we picked. And so we all three read it, and I can't wait to talk to them about it. And we're also gonna watch the movie while we're there. So I don't know, I just thought it would be fun to read something like light and magical and fun and comforting or something, like kind of like magical comfort, and this was it. It's so good. So Howl's Moving Castle is about a young girl named Sophie who
and so she was like a teenager, and now her body, she's like 70 or something, and ends up finding Howl, who is a magician, and it's just like
okay, so I just spent a whole convoluted like 10 minutes trying to explain this book, and I was really bad at it. And then I just read the back of this book, and I was like, oh, there you go. So I'm just going to read you the back of this book. In the land of Ingery, where 7-league boots and cloaks of invisibility really exist, Sophie Hatter attracts the unwelcome attention of the Witch of the Waste, who puts a curse on her. Determined to make the best of things, Sophie travels to the one place where she might get help, the moving castle which hovers over the nearby hills. But the castle belongs to the dreaded wizard Howl, whose appetite, they say, is satisfied only by the hearts of young girls. It's wonderful. It's so good. It was so fun. I couldn't put it down. And it's very short, and it's got these really great little illustrations at the beginning of every chapter. And this book is just full of magic, and it's full of adventure and friendship and found family, and I loved it. It was wonderful. I read it, totally read it, and I can't wait to watch the movie now. I know it's probably going to be pretty different, but I mean, Miyazaki can do whatever he wanted, and I might like the movie better now that I've read the book. I don't know. The last book that I read was The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School by Sonora Reyes. I think this might be my favorite book I read this month. It was so good. So this is a YA contemporary fiction about a young Chicana girl, and she and her brother are moved from public school to this private Catholic school, and because the younger brother keeps getting into trouble, into fights and stuff like that. And this girl is a lesbian, but she's closeted, and she had to go through an outing when she came out to her best friend, who she also was telling that she had a crush on. The girl took it really badly and outed her before she was ready. It was the first time that she came out to anybody, and it went really badly. And so she is like deeply closeted now. She doesn't want anybody to know that she's a lesbian. And so it's just this book about her going to a new school, meeting new people, making new friends, trying to navigate how to be herself around people who don't accept it. Especially, she's going to a Catholic school. It's like not okay to be gay in Catholic school. She ends up finding the one other out gay person in this Catholic school, becomes friends with her. It's about their relationship. It's about the relationship with all their friends and their family. It's about her relationship with her brother and her mother and her father. And it's so good. It's just so good. It's a fun, wonderful YA trip through this teenage girl's life. And it's queer, and it's Chicana, and those are like all of my favorite things. So it's wonderful. I loved it. Read it. What did you read in the month of July? I would love to hear about it. Were they like super summary reads? Mine were definitely not super summary reads. But I would love to know what you're reading right now, too. And I'm going to leave you with a quote from The Picture of Dorian Gray. Because while I didn't love reading this book, I did find it very quotable because Oscar Wilde is kind of a genius at one-liners. But before I leave you with my favorite Oscar Wilde quote from this book, thank you for being here. I appreciate it so much. If you're interested in checking me out anywhere, like on Patreon or Ko-Fi or Instagram or anything like that, you can check the links down below. They are in the description box. And I hope you're having a wonderful August. It's August 1st today, and I hope you're reading and knitting and cooking and drinking wonderful beverages and doing all the lovely summery things. It is perfectly monstrous the way people go about nowadays, saying things against one behind one's back that are absolutely and entirely true. Bye.